for today, our topic for discussion is more than essential. And of course, your contribution is surely valuable. To start the session, I would ask Frank to firstly give your thought. Then Rosanna and Hugh will have adding the key points before I will open the floor for the rest of us to jump in. Okay, Frank, if you're ready, please kick off the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Pierpont. Yes, actually, this was your idea. It was a good idea that we have kind of broad discussion as one of the components of the Zoom series. And what is critical is the title of a short essay I published in the forum section of Critical Policy Studies. And that appeared because at a plenary session of an IPA conference, the question was raised, what is critical? Somebody asked that. And someone else asked, well, why do we have to be critical? The editorial board took note of this and decided that it might be a good idea to have a symposium about this. And my remarks here are largely a short summary of what I said in that piece. Others don't have to speak to this. They can offer their own views, but this is just to sort of get it started. I've also added another point. We also published that forum because we were concerned about the fact that we were getting a lot of interpretive papers, but they weren't critical. And this seemed to reflect changing times, perhaps a more conservative academic climate. It seemed worrisome given the fact that critical policy studies began with a critical post-positivist perspective. When I was a graduate student, in turbulent times, featuring the war on poverty, the Vietnam War, feminism, environmental crisis, and on, critical was a sort of given theme. And it led to methodological debates, which were influenced in particular as the work of Jürgen Habermas got translated and came across, which featured what was widely known in German and elsewhere as Methodenstreit. The work of Habermas on scientism and democracy was especially influential in initiating and invigorating the first phase of what we now call critical policy studies, insofar as it offered a way to approach or search for a socially relevant methodology in public policy. That was what we were looking for. The General Academy was ignoring the issues in the streets and saying that we just have to be more empirical and someday we'll have the theory to explain all that. And the students were marching around, protesting in classes, occupying student university buildings and so forth. So this critical theory of Habermas offered a way of integrating empirical mainstream research with normative political analysis and ideology critique. It motivated John Forrester and myself to advance what we called at the time the argumentative turn. We had a debate when we formed the journal as to whether it should be called interpretive policy analysis or critical policy analysis, later studies. And the reason was that we felt that the word critical could move with the times. but we recognize that critical is fundamentally interpretive. One could almost say deeply interpretive. One approach offered by me begins, which largely became my version of the argumentative turn, was that interpretive analysis has to cover what the actors think or believe they are doing when they do it, not just what somebody else says they're doing. This involves collecting a lot of information because people don't tell the truth, or they don't sometimes even know what they're doing. So one has to interpret a variety of things to understand what's going on and what we would call the logic of the situation. But the critical interpretive analysis goes further than just plain interpretive analysis. It reflexively examines the statements and actions against the social meanings associated with them, that is, the meanings the actors have, and investigates these meanings against higher level norms and values related to the theoretical frameworks of which they're a part. It evaluates action in terms of the larger systems of meaning of which they are a part. For example, generally, worker management relations is discussed in terms of what goes on at the bargaining table, who makes which arguments, and so forth, in a strategic interaction. But a critical perspective would take this to a next step and examine this set of exchanges in terms of capitalist structures, functions, and norms in which these discussions are embedded. Can one be more systematic here? I've tried to be more systematic through an argumentative approach. In this approach, policy is taken to be a complex mix of factors, normative, empirical assessments, evaluations, and so on. And the argument is the thread that links them together, ties them together. And of course, this thread could go through the different parts in different ways. Anyway, the critical approach seeks to link the full range of components. Important in the methodological debates was the fact that we didn't reject the empirical altogether, only situated it in the normative framework that gives its meaning. And this is all can be found in detail in a book called Evaluating Public Policy that I published sometimes earlier. But why be critical? The second question. Because of social change. If we want to adequately explain and understand change, this involves the interpretive domain is crucial. Karl Mannheim pointed out that society is always becoming, it's always moving, even if we don't see the movement at a particular time. It's moving from one place to the other place, and the critical perspective is how to understand that movement. Gramsci understood this when he recognized the need of the dominant social forces, the elites, to control the ideological meanings in an effort to maintain their power. We thus need to reflexively explore the tensions between the existing structures and the underlying social, political, and cultural assumptions upon which they are based. To simply assume that we can take these assumptions for granted, as positivists largely do, means that at later points in time, we ignore the fact that all institutions and structures take on self-serving ideological roles. The job of the critical policy analyst is then to monitor and be alert to these underlying social shifts. I give an example that the Negro becomes the black man. So it's the same body, but it constitutes a new set of social relations. And if you speak, a white person has to speak differently to a black man, as in contrast to how one could tell a Negro when I was a boy, go get my suitcases from the train. Well, the black man would no longer do this. And that's a shift. So we have to be alert to these changes and discursively explore and interpret their meanings through processes of critical, deliberative argumentation, which would include my brief comments.